Hey, you intrepid explorers, it's time again for Trench Talk, your weekly infusion of underground metal and otherwise heavy music. I am your host, Flight of Icarus from MetalTrenches.com. If you're new to the channel, murder that subscribe button right now. We are available on YouTube, Google, and iTunes podcasts. Also, follow us on the social media platform of your choice and consider joining our email newsletter, with links down below to all of those things. Today we're going to be talking about Beaten to Death with their refreshingly inventive new album Agronomicon, which is a play on Lovecraft's Necronomicon. This is out via Moskina Recordings. And speaking of which, there's been a lot of Lovecraftian metal kind of coming through the gate lately. I'm not sure why so much at once. In fact, I'm going to be shouting out one a little bit later, but I digress. So Beaten to Death is a grindcore band based out of Oslo, Norway. Oslo often being known as one of the foremost black metal capitals of the world, but lately putting out a lot of other styles. There's a real burgeoning hardcore scene going on over there right now. But today we are going to be talking about a rather unique grindcore album from the area. Beaten to Death started in 2011 by members of Incense, Shooter, and She Said Destroy. Reading off of the press release, Oslo-based quintet Beaten to Death immediately eschewed all well-established notions of what grindcore should sound like and set out to create something unique, daring, and dangerous. Chaotically funny and massively innovative, the band's 3 studio albums, Zeus and Strokes from 2011, Dødsfest from 2013, and Unplugged from 2015 were all 100% recorded live and received a widespread critical acclaim. Beaten to Death have always revealed a total disregard for trends or the formulaic process sounds of modern productions, and the only formula they religiously follow since their inception is to record all tracks live without resorting to overdubs or any other studio trickery. Keeping with the B2D tradition, their forthcoming new album Agronomicon is filled to the rim with their catchy and groovy take on the grindcore genre. Strangely melodic tunes camouflaged with abrasive vocals, twangy Telecaster fiddling, drums a-blasting, and bass a-rumbling. I would recommend Beaten to Death to fans of Burials, Fuck the Facts, and Full of Hell. Now, the first word I'd actually use to describe this album is misleading, but in a good way. I actually had this album sitting in my queue for a while, having only sampled a few seconds of it, which is often the case. I get a lot of emails every day with a lot of new music, and so the first thing I do is just kind of quickly early in the morning kind of sample what I've got, see what sounds interesting, and then I'll throw it into the maybe pile or the definitely want to come back to this pile. And from listening to just those few seconds, I assumed this was going to be a pretty straightforward grindcore album, and you would be wrong if you thought that, and I definitely was. So the first few seconds of opening track Grindcorn, you heard this a little bit earlier. It kind of lulls you in with the typical aggression and violence that you've come to expect from the genre. But then the melodic elements kick in, and it's all bets off at that point. It's a very interesting and specific dichotomy of utterly destructive death grind with these more uplifting guitars you'd expect to hear on like a Touche Amore album. And that may sound weird, but I just want you to compare this from the album this from Touche Amore. Definitely some similarities there. This is that twangy Telecaster fiddling I believe they're referring to in the press release I just read. They're really uplifting riffs, more typical to post-hardcore and math rock than any of the harder genres, especially not from grindcore. And speaking of which, I've heard a lot of fusions over the years. That's something that I'm really interested in, is when people start slapping genres together, especially ones that don't seem like they'd fit together. But this particular one is a first to me. I can't think of another time I've heard grindcore joined with like post-hardcore and math rock, at least not in this particular way. So the approaches, they're just such polar opposites, and it seems like they should clash, but it manages to work in this really strange kind of way. One moment you've got these intensely brutal death growls and grunts and even some kind of power violence worthy music that you could compare to Full of Hell. And then the next you might as well be listening to Hopeful. Now, all this could easily kind of fall apart as a gimmick. I've heard bands from kind of softer genres, so to speak, incorporate heavier parts into their music to try to create this same sort of counterpart to their usual sound. And a lot of times that ends up leading to the latter sounding very generic. Even though I really like Mercure, I somewhat agree with the criticism in regards to her attempts at the more black metal side of her sound, that it's not particularly interesting. It's not bad. It's just sort of like really middle of the road, color by numbers genre music. And that's not a problem here though. Both the heavy and melodic portions are equally impressively written and really enjoyable, really engaging. I want to give special attention too to the bass tone, which is just super filthy. It's crunchy, purposefully kind of has this condensed, distorted sound. The production goes for kind of more high end that you'd expect too. Like you get a lot of much bassier albums in metal right now, and not so with this. Like everything's a little bit more kind of screechy and even piercing at times. Again, I'd say in a good way, it suits what they're going for. The drums are also great. You get the really genre-typical blast beats that you know and love from any number of other grindcore albums, but there's also some added technical flair to it. These guys are definitely really good at playing their instruments. And there are other times, too, where the tracks even start to sound like kind of a drum and bass duo. Groups like Bangladeshi and Morkobot. Now, one of my favorite tracks is actually one that stands out in approach from the others. And so most of the album is pretty fast-paced, really hard-hitting, still pretty aggressive. Despite the parts that are more melodic, they fly by pretty quickly too. But there's a track that, and I'm gonna butcher all these pronunciations, so I'm barely gonna try, but it's like Bjornstjerne Ibsen. That is track. I'm just gonna start giving you numbers. That's track 4 on the album. So this track takes things a lot slower. It has one of the most infectious grooves I've really ever heard on any number of songs. It just gets stuck in your head, and I want you to give that a listen here. Yeah, super catchy, great for listening over and over again. This is something I'd honestly like to hear more of, as my only real criticism of this album is that much of it sounds a little samey when you're listening passively. If you're really kind of digging into it and really paying attention, there's a lot of things going on, a lot of subtle differences. But again, just if you're throwing it on and kind of listening while you're driving or doing some work, it starts to run together a little bit. But all in all, at only 22 minutes, it's a really tight album that doesn't leave any room for you to actually get bored. Agronomicon is just intriguing in general, but maybe more so because of where it's coming from. Again, it's the type of experimental album I tend to associate more with like the Japanese extreme music scene, more so than Scandinavia. There are, though, some allusions to that kind of like older school sound of black metal. Lots of Tom G. Warrior-esque coming in throughout the album. Particularly, I feel like the further you get into it, the more those start to pop up. So I enjoy that as well. In terms of ratings, I gave it a 9 for enjoyability. I took a point off just again because of some of my issues with the sameness that flows from song to song. And I felt like the fusion worked better on some tracks than on others. Overall, still an A, still good stuff. Gave it a 10 for musicianship because these guys, again, are pretty damn technical. It's a very impressively played album, and that makes it much more interesting than maybe your average grindcore album. And along those same lines, I gave it a 9 for innovation because this is a very unique album. You're not going to hear many other things that sound like this, especially in the grindcore genre, but really just in general, I could not think. I had a hard time. Here's a good litmus test for, is this album really doing something different? When I go to do my For Fans Of section, if I'm really kind of stumped, then I feel like the band has done a good job of doing something unique. But the closest comparison I could think of is, I mentioned this band Burials, which I believe are a Portland band. They do some similar stuff where they're kind of this like technical extreme band, but then they detour off into these more kind of atmospheric, almost like surfer rock elements. So definitely some comparisons there, but by and large, you're not going to find many other bands doing things quite like this. In terms of my favorite tracks, again, I'm probably just going to have to give you numbers here. So there's Der Herved Oplost, probably not even close. That is track 2. Bjornstjerne Ibsen, which I mentioned before, that's track 4. And Ga Snubel Bli Legenda, which is track 7. So for you people out there that I assume this is Norwegian, if you speak that, I apologize for my awful skills. I speak English, some Spanish, and some German, but definitely no Norwegian, which I hear is a very difficult language in general. So anyways, nice to cover some grindcore. I really like the genre, but one, I just don't get a lot of it in my inbox. It's not something that's kind of being pushed to me to a high degree. And then two, the stuff I do get often just really sounds the same. And that's not to say that it's bad. The stuff I hear is often quite good. It's just, it's not very interesting to talk about. What am I going to say? There's blast beats, ugly vocals, berating riffs. That's about it. So fun to listen to, not so fun to describe, but it was great to get a band that had something a little bit different going for it that made it more fun to talk about. Now, in case you're wondering, on a related note, I am always interested in covering a broad swath of music. I know I tend to shy away from classic heavy metal and power metal in particular. That's not because I have drawn a line in the sand that I'm not going to talk about those genres. There's a lot of reasons for it. Part of it is just that I don't have a lot of history with it. I don't know a lot about it. It's not something that just generally I enjoy listening to. But that said, I've always been interested in taking on some more writers that is their forte, so that I can appease those fans who do like listening to those types of music. Because even though I say, because you need to be told what to listen to, my word is definitely not final say. There's lots of music out there that I don't like that I am sure large groups of people would enjoy. So I don't want to deter people from checking things out. So if you're interested, hit up our email. It's listed on our Facebook page and in some other places. Only let us know if it's something you're serious about. And no, unfortunately, we don't pay because we don't get funded. So until that happens, maybe that day will come. It's just a kind of passion project, way to get your name out there, way to get some practice and work samples together. All right, let's move along to shout-outs. Got 3 more for you here. First up is Sudestada with Yo Soy El Mar via the Braves Records. This is the debut album from Madrid, Spain. They're a hardcore band. If you take the wailing riffs and energetic drumming of Converge, add some Spanish-speaking lyrics, and a more constricted vocal delivery, you've basically got Sudestada. So this was a band, I always like when bands reach out to me directly. It's cool to get press releases, and I have certain PR people that I really enjoy talking to and think that they legitimately have a love for this music, but nothing really beats having a band just send things to me directly and show that they like the site and would be interested in being featured. So thanks to them for reaching out, and I hope that including you guys on here gets you some more play and more people coming to your Bandcamp page where people can pick up the album. I would recommend this to, again, fans of Converge, Grieved, and Moraine. Next up, we've got Sulphur Aeon with The Scythe of Cosmic Chaos through Van Records. This is a German blackened death metal band with Lovecraft as a lyrical and conceptual foundation. So I said before, getting lots of Lovecraftian bands coming through. This is probably one of the foremost and most outward with that as an influence. This is not their finest album, I would say, but it's still very good. My understanding it's their third. I would actually very much recommend the previous one, their second album called Gateway to the Antisphere, which is just excellent. It's not perfect, but I really enjoy it to the point where it kind of stuck with me, and I ended up buying the CD copy for the excellent artwork. Part of their sound that is really interesting and different is it sounds kind of like they're recorded underwater, which is in keeping with some of the Lovecraft mythology of these underwater creatures. So you've got these very kind of behemoth-y sounding riffs, but they've got this added effect to them that just sounds like it's being recorded in the deep. It reminds me of that episode of Metalocalypse where they're recording in the Mariana Trench and want to get that really deep down sound going on. So these guys have pulled it off. Lots of lore and monsters from the Lovecraft universe also popping up in both the song titles and the visuals. So recommended for fans of Behemoth, Shamash, and Hideous Divinity. And last but not least, we've got Veilburner with A Sire to the Ghouls of Lunacy from Transcending Obscurity Records. This is a black and death metal band out of Pennsylvania, which I did a double take when I read that because I had kind of assumed they were out of Europe. They have this very jumbled, experimental, and technical sound that I stereotypically often attribute to France, but lo and behold, they're right here out of the US on the East Coast. I became a fan of Veilburner in a big way with their 2016 album, The Obscure Rite, which is excellent. This is another case where I think that album, the previous album, is a little bit better, but only by a hair in this case. This is still really great stuff, great mixture of kind of psychedelic with this more chaotic, intense, extreme approach. I'd recommend this for fans of Shamash, Aeneon, Entropia, and perhaps even Imperial Triumphant. So that's it for today. I apologize for when the iTunes version is late, but there is actually a 2-hour per month cap on our Buzzsprout account where I upload the episodes for audio on iTunes and Google. My first simple goal is honestly just getting us to a point where we can make the $12 a month so that I can upgrade that to 3 hours and also prevent the old episodes from being auto-deleted, because that's what a basic membership gets you. So please consider contributing to the Patreon or direct PayPal, or also donating on our Bandcamp with one of the Name Your Price samplers we put up. We actually just put up a new one for the holidays that you can download, again, at the price of your choosing. There's also the ABCs of Black Metal on our store page that you can pay. I think it's just $3 right now to get a digital copy of. Also, if any of you have any tasteful ad connections out there, let us know. Something I would be interested to doing as long as it's not too distracting from the music and what we're trying to do here as an overall message. And also let us know what more you'd like to hear from this channel on our various social media pages or in the comments on YouTube. I'm also playing with some different intros and outros and taglines. Be interested if people have other ideas. In this business, you need a hook, they say. Thanks as always, though, for listening and spreading the word. The algorithms are garbage for sites like mine right now on social media, so word of mouth really means everything. Grab your friend's phone and subscribe them while they're in the bathroom or something. Please consider, again, joining our mailing list, which, again, the links are down below for that. That is the surefire way to get updates every single month direct to your email and not wondering if you're going to get matched up with a post or not. As always, I am Flight of Icarus signing off, and I will see you in the trenches.